Hey, what's up, amazing people? We're about to get started. I'm so excited about tonight because this is another session of this amazing Good Grief series that we've been doing. And before we pop up on the screen, we're getting some stuff together as well. We just got a few people that have kind of jumped in last minute. If you sent the link to people, let me say this: if you sent the link to people and they did not get the email because they just signed up 2 minutes ago, you can actually send them over to my YouTube page. We're doing something different today. We're going to allow it to be on YouTube as well. So, so I wanted to be sure that you have all the options to be able to give people this particular information and allow people to join in on this amazing conversation. This is going to be amazing tonight. So I'm going to do, let's see, let me light this up real quick on this side because I want to be sure that let me copy the link, that we get this rolling the right way. So I have some amazing guests on tonight, and I know that a lot of you all are on because these amazing guests are here, and I'm so excited about that. And so we have Dr. Matisa Wilbon, and so and then also we have Miss Ray with us. And so, like, I've known Ray for a while. I'm just getting acquainted with Dr. Matisa, and I'm learning her platform. She just did an amazing discussion on this actual topic, good grief, on a TED talk that someone actually sent to me. And when I took a listen to it, I was wowed by the things that were shared and the things that she said, because I've been dealing with that. And so we're going to dive into this tonight, guys. And this is going to be absolutely amazing. And so let me get Zoom straight. Zoom, can y'all see us? All right, I just came on the screen. Can y'all see us? I want to make sure that you can. I know YouTube seems to be up and running on the YouTube end. Also, let's see, watch live now. Okay. I'm trying to make sure. Okay. All right. So somebody responded to me in the Zoom chat. All right. Said we can see y'all. Dr. Matisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Oh, listen, I am super excited. I'm super, super, super excited. Ray, how are you?
Doing pretty good. I've been looking forward to it as well.
That's what I like to hear. I mean, I'm privileged to have these two amazing women on this call tonight, and we are about to dive in. Let me see. Um, Wait a minute, you can't hear them? Is that what you're saying? Let's see, can't hear them. Can't. Okay, hold on. Let me make sure. And we had a volume thing last time. I want to make sure though. Okay. Okay. Let me see. Okay, they're saying that you all's volume is low. Let me see something real quick. If you guys can turn up the volume on your end,
Mhm.
I'm gonna cut it up on my end because maybe it may be on my end.
Okay.
Um,
Looks like YouTube can hear.
okay, YouTube can hear.
Hmm.
Uh, let's see. We may move people over to YouTube. I don't know. Okay, Adrian says she's louder on your end. Okay. Sorry about this, guys. Just going through these technical difficulties. You know how it is. We know how it is.
Absolutely.
The devil be trying to work on these airways. He's a liar.
Listen,
He's a liar. You hear me?
shut it down.
Shut it down. We ain't having it.
Not at all.
All right, let me see. I'm gonna make sure. Okay. All right. So people saying that they can hear fine now.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to be sure. All right. So let's and I'll, as you guys are talking, I'll still try to make sure everybody can hear, and I try to keep up with the chats. So we have two chats kind of running simultaneously. So we have the chat in the Zoom going on, and then also we have the chat on the YouTube live situation. So it's already there and already recording. And so, but I want to dive into this conversation. And before we do, my prayer tonight is just that someone is encouraged to continue to keep living, that they know that they're not by themselves. Also, to know that this feeling of grief is not just the absence of a loved one. This feeling of grief can be just the breaking of any normality that we are so accustomed to. And I think that a lot of times we only look at grief as losing a loved one, and we don't look at how grief becomes grief even when you leave that job, even when you leave that relationship.
Yep.
And you can know the right steps to take and take those right steps. It can be ordained by God and still have a level of grief. And I want us to be encouraged with that. And I want us to understand that we're not by ourselves, and we're all facing some level of grief in letting go. And even on this walk with our relationship with God, God can instruct you, tell you, you can hear from God, know exactly what you're supposed to do with your relationship with God, and experience an extreme amount of grief at the same time. So I want us to get out of the theory and out of the mindset that grief um, only comes with the concept of losing a loved one. And so I want us to, and then also, like, what do we do with this thing? What do we do with grief? What do we do with these emotions? What do we do with these feelings? And so I'm so excited to have these two women on that talk, teach, and impact people's lives through this level of teaching on grief. And they have an extreme task because, as they're teaching, I even felt that when I was watching the TED Talk with Dr. Matisa, I was looking at it, and I was like, man, like, that puts so much language to what I feel. And a lot of times we just need the proper language to embrace and understand exactly what we feel. And so tonight we want to put some language to what you may feel. And so I thank God for these two women that have agreed to be on tonight, to agree to walk this journey out with you guys. And please, if you guys have questions, please put the questions in the chat. I'll be sure to ask those questions as I moderate it. But I want to start off with this concept, or maybe this thought or this question, however it comes out. I ask both of you, should we feel a level of shame for prolonged grief? Like, how our culture tells us that we are to hurry up and get over certain things, right? And a lot of times, if we still feel it, we start to feel bad that we still feel it. Like, man, like, I should be over this by now. I should be better by now. I should be able to move on and feel different by now. Should we feel shame because of that? And I start with you, Ray. Should we feel shame because of that?
Absolutely not. One of my really good friends, a brother of mine in ministry, who's also a grief coach, it was 10 years, December, this is 2023, 10 years, December 2021, since his father passed. And we did a series for the holidays, a grief, like navigating through grief series. And he said on Facebook, on the Facebook Live, he said, today it felt like the first time I had heard my father died. Now,
Wow.
mind you, I said it had been 10 years. And so
Wow.
the interesting thing about that is we do put ourselves in this position of, oh, we should feel this way or oh, we should feel that way. But you've never reached year 10 before, right? You've never reached week 2 before. You've never reached month 3 before. And so we have to allow ourselves the grace to remember that grief is not a destination, it's a journey. And
Yeah.
so as we journey along in grief, there are going to be things that come up that we never even noticed before. And so I don't believe that there's any shame in prolonged grief, not at all.
Mhm.
Wow. Dr. Matisi.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I'm very, very cautious, actually, I don't do at all. I don't tell people how to grieve. I give strategies, tips, and tools. We all have a unique experience and journey with grief. My perspective is if we can do it in a healthy way, that God can walk alongside with us. He can literally sup with us. We sing He's a lily in the valley, but we never want to be in the valley. The grief process, right, is the opportunity for us to learn and to grow, which is why I think understanding grief in its proper place can be good. No shame in it at all. Now, I do think, and I know Ray does this work so beautifully, my goal is to make sure that people have the tools to do it. Sometimes prolonged grief is just people really not grieving at all. We have to
Mm,
understand what grief is. Sometimes for people, they're really just holding on to the possibility that things are going to be different,
Yeah,
or grief becomes a badge of honor, right? So I do believe that if we can acknowledge it and give tools for it, I do feel like people can, come through it to some degree much more quickly than they would otherwise, but never put a time limit on it or shame at all.
wow. Wow. I really love you guys' perspective on that and insight on that, because I think a lot of times we I've seen it happen with me. I just say I've seen it happen with me through the journey of the men in my life that have transitioned, um, however they've transitioned, but they've transitioned. And I at times will put a time stamp on when I should feel better about this particular situation or this person passing away. Like it's like, I have good days, then I'll wake up one day and I just be like, man, this sucks. This, it could be and I really would like for you guys to touch on this as well, because although you think that you should be over something, something can trigger. Like we have triggers that make us think about our loved ones, make us think about a place. Because, like I talked about in the very beginning, grief is not just a loved one. It could be a place. It could be, you worked at this place and they played this song every time you were at work. And, you hear that song and then it triggers an emotion of grief concerning you remembering that place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and so I would love for y'all to touch on like the trigger points of grief, like, because again, like we feel like, oh well, that was 2 years ago, I should be, I should be stronger, or I should be. And like you said, Dr. Matisa, I really think that people think because I give it time that I've grieved,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not always the case. We can give things time and not properly treat them. And I know Ray has been on some sessions where I talked about that. Like, we our culture teaches us that time heals all wounds. But if
Mm-hmm.
that wound is not properly treated, only thing that time is going to do is infect it.
that's
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
it's
That's
not
right.
going to heal it. Like it doesn't magically heal because I chose to leave it alone. We think that it's out of sight, out of mind. But the concept is like, it can be 3 years. Grief is still gonna be waiting at that door for you to deal with it and for you to
That's right.
deal with those emotions. And it may be a trigger. It may be a trigger. My mom is on here now. My mom talks about a doctor that my mom's a nurse, and a doctor that she worked for. He was talking about one time that it had been years. I think it was his father. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. She's probably gonna be wild that I remember the story, but um, I think his father had passed, and he was in a movie theater, and he
Mm-hmm.
saw a scene that reminded him of his father, and he had to leave the movie theater because
Mm-hmm.
it was like years, but he got triggered by something. And then at that point, he said that's when he really started dealing with his grief. So, you know, how do we deal with those triggers? And a lot of times I think that we're trying to run from those triggers to where we don't deal with them. And so, Dr. Matisa, can you talk about like how to kind of possibly deal with triggers in a healthy way, or what do we do when triggers arise?
Absolutely. You said so much. One thing that I wanted to just add to what you said, the world tells us how much we're supposed to grieve, how much time. And then on the flip side, the church says, well, we don't sorrow as other men sorrow. And so
That
when you
First
put all,
Thessalonians.
there you go. Listen, I can remember after my mom passed away in 2017, that was the thought that went through my mind. And so it took me a while to even start grieving because I'm a leader, I'm a minister, I'm teaching, I'm preaching. How is it, that I grieve? Does that mean I'm weak if I'm not able to do X, Y, Z? And so this is the thing about it. The psychology of human emotion creates triggers, period. You can listen to a song and take yourself back to when you were in high school and a certain special event happened, right? You can go somewhere and the brain brings the memory up of a relationship that you had. Why do we think it is such a far-fetched idea that we're going to hear a song or see something and not feel the emotion of the absence of a loved one, or the loss of a relationship, or the inability to produce in the way that you thought you would? All of those things are absolutely, absolutely true. So, number one, having the trigger, acknowledging that it's a trigger, is the first step to being able to deal with it.
Mm.
Not too long ago, I saw something that reminded me of my mom. My mom's been gone since 2017. God has brought me a long way, but it took me back to that moment. So this is what I made the decision to do. How did I deal with it in a healthy way? I acknowledged it. Man, I'm sad. Like you said, this sucks. My mama is not here. And then I watched a television show that I know she loved. I did something special that would give me a good memory of my
Yeah.
mom. So one healthy strategy after you've acknowledged it is to think about how it is now that I could bring in a good moment too, not to balance it, because I don't necessarily think that it balances it, but it reminds my brain that the negative part is not all that I know of my loved one. I
Ooh.
don't only know the day she passed, but I know all the years that we had before. So that's
Yeah. Oh, that's rich, because I think a lot, like you said, like that's what we keep reliving, right? We keep reliving the day that they died. It's like, oh yeah, like, and we kind of just, we kind of isolate it. It's like, yeah, my mom's life or my dad's life or whatever the case is, but the highlight is the day that they passed away. And you saying being intentional about remembering their life and
yeah.
not just their death.
Mhm.
Oh man, that's so good. Ray, what would you chime in about triggers and how to deal with those things?
I want to name two things before that. Something that you said in the very beginning of this second part of the conversation, you named getting over it. We do not get over grief.
Mhm.
So if anybody ever told you that, you can tell them I said that they're wrong, right? And I mean it. That this is something I mean that with my whole heart. I wrote a book about it. It's
Yeah.
called In Lieu of Flowers: The Do's and Don'ts of Grief Support, because you don't tell somebody to get over it, right?
Yeah.
Do you want me to tell you to get over it when you experience a loss like that? So please don't come to me telling me to get over it, and you should not tell it to anybody else, right?
Yeah.
The second thing with that scripture about we sorrow not, the rest of the text that the pastor seemed not to say, right,
Mhm.
is that it says we do not grieve as those without hope,
Come
right?
on.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say that we can't grieve, but we grieve knowing that we have hope in knowing that we'll see our loved ones again, right? That
Yeah.
that the non death related situation is still going to work itself out in some way, shape, or form. Does it
Mhm.
mean that we won't feel anything? Absolutely not, because friends, Jesus wept. His whole homie Lazarus was dead.
Yeah.
Even though he knew what was going to happen, he still wept. And even though that is the quote unquote recorded time that we see he wept, there were other times where Jesus wept too. So if Jesus wept, then why the church say we can't do it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be crickets on that. So to answer the question about the triggers, I completely agree with what you said, Dr. Matisa. We have to acknowledge them, right? We have to, the first way to healing is to acknowledge that there's an injury,
Yeah.
right? The first way to fixing the problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. So when you are in that space and you know that you are feeling the feelings for whatever that reason you're grieving, you definitely have to acknowledge it. Like triggers, you know how we say like life be life, and we talk about that right now. Triggers be triggers. They gonna do triggers are gonna do what they do because it is natural, right? It's normal. We can't avoid it. And so we just have to be willing to acknowledge it. We have to be willing to express whatever feelings that we have. I always tell people when I am coaching, when I'm doing workshops, anybody that I come across with expressing grief, as long as you do not hurt yourself, anybody else, no pets, no possessions, and no property, then the way you grieve is safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good. That's so good. Like, and Ray, you know, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because we, you know, at times we definitely, when we read that scripture, we butcher it because we don't give it the context of the text. Like, you know, and it's,
Yes,
you know, that portion of, you know, is like, you know, we read that and we leave it off. Well, we don't grieve. No, we don't grieve like people that don't have hope.
exactly.
We grieve, but we grieve with the concept of that there's a hope connected to this.
Yes,
There's a other side connected to this, that
yes,
we are still that we're still prayerful, we're still hopeful, we still understand, and we
yes.
grasp this thing of life. So I love that you shed some light on that, because it is definitely oftentimes overlooked and left out in the context of when we talk about it. So yeah, let's this thing of triggers, and someone asked a question. I'm gonna come to it in a moment, but this thing of triggers and this thing of also not just allowing the death date, and how we health from a healthy space. Let me say that. I didn't say healthily. I don't know if that's like
Yeah. No,
that.
that's right.
Okay, all right. You know how we, you know, from a healthy space, remember our loved ones, right? And doing things that when we feel the pressure of that grief, doing things to remember them. And I want to touch on this, and you guys shed some light on this for me. That grief at times, what I found in my own life, that we start to revert to certain coping mechanisms when it comes to grief. And we don't understand why we all of a sudden started doing this, or went back to that, or started thinking this way, and
Ooh,
not understanding like it's a coping mechanism. You're trying to cope to a level of grief or to a level of pain, and you're trying to find ways to now adjust to your new form or to your new way of life. Ray, I'm glad that you said this, that we don't get over it. Our last good grief session 2 weeks ago, Pastor Chris talked about you don't get over grief, you go through grief, and you'll be going through it for the remainder of your life. It's your new
yeah.
norm. It's now I'm adapting to a new normality. I told them the last session that me and God had to have this war and this battle about grief, because I got to a point where I was really praying, guys. Like, now y'all may laugh at me, but y'all probably have been there too. But like, I was praying to God. I was like, God, take this grief away. Like, take this grief away. And then God just really was telling me, like, if I take away the grief, then I take away the memory of that person.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't have one without the other. Like, you can't, like, your grief is the memory of what you have, what you experienced with this person, your love for this person. So if I take the grief away, then I take away the memory, and I take away that love that you have for them and that you have for them.
Mm-hmm.
So like I had to sit with that from the concept of, okay, God, like I don't want you to take away the memory. So that grief, although uncomfortable, although it hurts, it's like changing the narrative, like we're saying, like to a level of good grief. It's a way in which that we remember them, and and just trying to get to that point, but then also identifying with, maybe I've been trying to cope by operating a certain type of way. Let me ask you this, for your, with your personal experiences and your personal battles with grief itself, or your personal relationship, because I don't even want to call grief a battle. It's what I think it's
Right.
what we lean into now. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, like, yo, I'm grieving, and that's not a bad thing. I think we put a bad stigma on it, to be able, like, oh, like grief is so, it's just bad. But have you seen in your own lives where you started leaning towards a coping mechanism when you with this journey and this walk of grief?
100%. I would say for me, one of the things that I say, one of my mantras, if you will, is that grief is necessary. So let me just put that out there. That's why ultimately grief is good. It is, we need it, right? Otherwise, we have these pent up emotions and these feelings and these things within us that we're not able to get out. So grief is absolutely necessary. For me, it was definitely eating. And I did not connect the two. But as I started grieving my mom's passing, long story short, my mom had breast cancer. I left my family in Kentucky, my husband and my kids, left my job, and came and stayed with her, was with her every day on the floor. And we, talking about the trauma leading up to the passing, that's a whole other conversation. But was with her. And then when she got transferred to hospice, I was there with her every day. I'm writing her obituary.
Wow.
And she's lying there
Wow.
by herself, right? So you talk about a level of trauma that I didn't even recognize, but I can remember the hospital care was blessed in a lot of ways because the doctors and everybody there was so kind and helpful. But they would bring around these trays of food, and they would leave them in the little space. And I can remember going back there and eating as much as I could before anybody came in. And I didn't put two and two together. I mean, I normally don't eat that way, but as I thought back, I was trying to stuff. My coping mechanism was just to put as much in me as I could. Numb. I couldn't think. I don't even remember the taste. I just remember needing that food. And that continued for a while until, again, I recognized the depth of my grief because my mom
Mm.
passed away a couple of weeks later. And I continued with that coping mechanism. And I knew that it was a negative coping mechanism because it didn't make it better. It only made me feel worse. It only made my body feel worse. It only numbed my emotions that much more. And then when I recognized that I was grieving, I could identify the depression that saints don't go through, but I sure was going through it.
Come
The,
on. Come
the
on. Talk about it, Dr. Matisa. Talk about
listen,
that.
God debunked all those myths for me. I was like, Lord, forgive me for all that teaching, that bad teaching I was doing before, because I'm experiencing these things. But once I was able to identify it, then he allowed me to start dealing with it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was my coping mechanism for sure.
Ray, before you jump in, Dr. Matisa, I want to tell you, for one, I don't know why that just did my heart so good, to not that you dealt with that. The fact that you said this, I say this all the time, that as we matriculate through life, our messages mature.
Yes, they do.
Like the things that we didn't realize that we had an even dogmatic approach to even scripture or text in life. Life will soften your message, not soften it from a standpoint of, oh, it's no longer heaven or hell, not that, but I'm talking about our approach to certain things once we gain compassion for them. And it's certain things that, I, I'll be like, well, we are just Holy Spirit to deal with that. And it's very true that he wants to, but also at the same time, we got to process that and deal with those emotions. And depression is a real thing,
Absolutely.
and a lot of times I think that, as we go through life, we just, our messaging matures,
Mm-hmm.
and our approach to it matures. And so I really, really, really want people to hear that, because I don't think I think that even as preachers, teachers of the word, we're all preachers and teachers of the word that's on this platform right now. But as preachers and teachers of the word, I think it's important for us to understand that if you don't go back and listen to a message that you preached 5 years ago, and you don't see a growth in that, or you don't see maybe a slight change in, it may not, what I'm saying, like once you've kind of gone through some things, and it's not to say that what you teach was wrong. It just maybe your approach would have been different now, as
That's right.
you go through this, or you go through these particular things. And so it's so awesome to hear you say that, because I think a lot of times we get so caught up in sticking to our guns
Mm-hmm.
on what we used to say, or how we used to approach it, or what we used to preach, that we leave
Mm-hmm.
no room for growth and matriculation.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you for saying that. Ray, in your own personal journey with grief, has there been coping mechanisms for you?
Yes, and so as you at the moment you said that, this is what I heard. Is it a coping mechanism or is it a comfort mechanism? Because
Mm.
most times the reason why we're coping is because we're uncomfortable, right? Because we don't want to face it, because we don't want to deal with it. I hear so many people talk about the fact that they don't want to allow themselves to cry because they feel like if they start, they're not going to stop, or it's going to take them so far down, right, that they're not going to know how to bring themselves out of it. I'll say for me, I got busy. I
Mm.
just, as much as I could do, I did, so that I wouldn't have to think about it. But grief definitely tapped me on my shoulder and said, we have some things we need to talk about." Yeah, I got busy. I got busy. I did as much as I could, even into the extent, AD, that I realized that my helping people through their grief, while I was sincerely doing it, it was also a way for me to not have to think about my own.
Woo, talk, Ray. Yeah,
It
man.
was real. And my sister had to bring that to my attention. She said, "Ray, like, I know that you enjoy what you do. I know you are glad to be able to help people." She said, "But are you helping people?" She said, "Are you navigating your own grief?" And I had to tell her, I said, in the beginning, I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. Like, I'm helping people." Like, I'm helping people. And then those triggers that we talked about earlier would just show up, and I didn't have a choice but to stop what I was doing and allow myself to feel what I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Ray, you just said a mouthful, because I do think that we get so caught up. I know I did. My coping mechanism work, or comfort mechanism, as you're saying, like work, like it just became my thing. I just threw myself, and I was always like, oh, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing this. But when that grief hit, it's like, bury it under as much stuff as you possibly can. Bury
Mm-hmm.
this anger, bury these questions that you have, bury your inquisitiveness about the life and journeys of death and so forth and so on. Bury it as far as you possibly can, and packed upon top of it work and being busy. So I didn't, my father, my stepfather passed away in 2018. 2 months after that, my father died in a car wreck. After my 2 months after my stepfather, 6 months after that, my brother passed. So this started all happening in 2018. So my father, my stepfather, I mean my stepfather, my father, then my brother, then my stepmother. She grieved to death. Like, she just stopped
Wow.
living. She just was like I don't have nothing else to live for. She would, like, it was just one of those things. Then my uncle, my old manager, one of my closest friends, Johnny Sledge, he passed away during that time. Then my uncle passed away 2021, and I did not, even with the string of deaths from 2018, I didn't feel those deaths until 2020, and mainly because I tried to overcompensate with work. What I found myself in 2019, when me and my accountant sat down, when COVID hit, that's when I had to sit with my grief. I tell people this all the time. Like, we talk about the pandemic, we talk about being sitting still and so forth and so on, and how much we hated being in the house. It, it was fun at first. It was like, oh, we home for 3 weeks. Oh my God, yes. Then week 5, week 6, week 8, we was like, wait a minute, now hold up. Some got to shake. But for me, in 2019, out of a year of 52 weeks, I traveled 49 of those weeks preaching.
Wow.
49 weeks out of 52-week year. On top of my Wednesday nights for my church, on top of 2 services on Sunday, what I did, I just got busy. And I called busy healed. Like, so I was like, oh, I'm busy. I'm not feeling it. You do understand your adrenaline. Just like, if you ever been in a fight, if you ever been hit with something, if something's ever happened and you just kept moving, it's your adrenaline. It's the, and that adrenaline space can last for as long as you allow it to, until you actually have to sit down and sit in it. So I called busy. I was like, oh, I'm healed, until 2020 hit. And then now all the engagement stopped. Nothing I couldn't mask it with anymore. I had to literally sit with what I was feeling. And then that's when all of the emotions, all of the pain, all of the whatever. And then, so I'm with you on comfort and coping being the fact that overworking, just, and especially not in our culture, we're just taught to keep going.
Yep.
It's one of the most toxic traits that I think that we tell our people all the time. African American culture, we tell our people, get over it. Life keeps moving. But here's my question, as I prefaced all that to say, we dealing with the coping and comfort mechanisms, but what do we, to this toxic thought of, I just gotta keep going. What do we say to people that feel like life has gone on, but they can't go on? Because I've literally felt that way. I felt like everything was moving around me. And I'm at a point now where everybody's been asking me like, well, when you gonna start up another church, or if you're gonna go back into ministry, or you're gonna do this, or you're gonna do this. And I was telling them, it's not a matter of the fact that I can. It's a matter of emotionally, should I? Not a matter of can I, it's emotionally, should I? Because there's a confidence factor that I'm still processing. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't get the privilege. I watched me as a pastor war for other people to be healed, and God healed them.
AD,
and then
stop.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that for my dad.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. Like I like the one that really took me, like my dad was a shock because it was a car wreck. Mm-hmm. And I was thrown all the way off. But my brother had lung cancer. My brother was sick. I was believing God for a miracle, stood in the gap, my confidence in God. I was like, God, you're going to do this. Like my stepfather had been sick. He was a walking miracle. He was on dialysis for years. And so that death, like my stepfather he was recording videos while he was at work on third shift for us to see. We found them a year later after he passed away, of him encouraging us because he knew his time was coming. My father, we didn't get that opportunity. With my brother, I warred for God. I had confidence in God that God was not going to allow my brother to die. Mm-hmm. and that confidence was hit. So how I was like, how can I teach to a people a confidence that I no longer have?
Mm.
So what do we say to people that feel like I got to hurry up and get it together, and I got to hurry up and move on, and I got to hurry up and get my life back on track? Life is lifing. Things are
Yeah.
going, but you feel stuck. Like you literally feel stuck. What do we say to those people that feel stuck because of grief, and what are some, if any, what do we say to them, and if there's any tools or if there's anything that can help them kind of get back into the game at the right time?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we can't just stop living, right? But at the right time. And I think that timing is so important. So what do we say to those people? And Ray, could you chime in on with that first?
Yeah, yeah. First and foremost, I do tell people to be gracious with yourself, to be gentle with yourself, because you've not gone this way before, right? Not only, we can't even get to the new of it because it's so unfamiliar, right? And
Mm.
so I'm always telling people to be gracious with themselves, be gentle with themselves, and be honest. It's funny, Dr. Matisa, that you talked about, like, my mama gone, this sucks. I walk around this house and say that very often. To be quite honest about it, I tell God I'm questioning your decision making skills, homie, because my whole mama is gone.
Yeah.
Something ain't right. But if we are not honest about how we feel and why we're feeling the way we feel, then we won't be able to move on. I think another thing that we have to be mindful of is not to compare our loss or our grief to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Because ironically enough, Dr. Matisa, I didn't know that both of us experienced the death of our mothers in 2017. Both of our
Mm.
mothers died from cancer in 2017, right? And so this is a perfect example. I can't look at Dr. Matisa and say, well, oh my gosh, she's doing this, she's doing that. I must not be grieving fast enough, or I must not be grieving the right
Man,
way, because
talk about that.
I don't know what her relationship with her mother was, just like she doesn't know the relationship with my mother. And to that point, everybody doesn't have great relationships with the people who died. So then that's a whole new kind of grief, because
That's
not
right.
only am I grieving because you're gone, but I'm also grieving because for whatever reason we couldn't get it right.
Mm.
And so you have to be honest, you have to be gracious, you have to be gentle, and do not compare. No two people grieve the same. If we look at our hands, the prints in our hands are different. We got two hands on the same body, and both of them are different. So
Mm-hmm.
we do ourselves a disservice. We do ourselves a great disservice when we create this expectation, this standard that we have to be at a certain place at a certain time, because if you continue to operate from that space, you'll be on a hamster wheel that you can, I say a merry-go-round. They gonna turn out the lights in the amusement park. Everybody gonna be gone. You're gonna have to figure a way out, figure a way off of it. And so it's a matter of honesty, being gracious and gentle with yourself, and don't compare. Just admit where it is that you are. You know what I mean? And one tear, one shaking fist. Because I be like, God, listen, my whole mama gone, not half, all of her is gone, right? Like,
Yeah.
just be honest about how you feel.
Yeah.
And one last thing, um, it's okay to seek help. It's okay
Definitely.
to seek help. And I'm not talking about prayer line help. Let's be clear, because we do not need to be telling people to pray about their grief, because your prayers are not going to stop my tears in this moment, right? I may be able to recognize, like, oh, so and so is praying for me, but it still don't take away from the fact that my whole mama gone. So it's okay to seek help. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to seek help.
Yep.
I love that.
I
I,
think I think what I would add. Oh, we're gonna jump in.
no, no, no. Go ahead. No, I
I
was
think what
telling you to go.
I would definitely agree with everything that Ray said. I would give a little bit of a different perspective, or just add this to what she said. I do think we have to be intentional about our healing. Healing is supernatural, and healing can come. Doesn't mean that we're not still going through grief, but the grief or the way I experience grief now is different than it was in 2017. Doesn't mean that the waves don't come. It doesn't mean that it doesn't knock me off my feet. But I do believe, because I've been intentional about getting to God, about being honest, about getting the help that I need, that God has done a work in me. And that also is the hope. Not just that I'm going to see my mom again, and I know I will, but that I don't have, what I say about grief in terms of my personal experiences. Grief comes to visit, but I do not let him live. I do not let him live here. So when I do feel grief coming, I'll say, okay, I'm feeling it right now. But I'm not going to allow weeks or months on end to go where I fall into a darkness, because the other side of that is, if we're not intentional, and you said this, I think you said your stepmother grieved to death. We know that there is a physiological connection with the emotion. And if we allow ourselves to get to that dark place, that it could take us to a place that we wouldn't imagine. I'll tell you this example for my mom. My mom was a pastor. God used her to raise a family member from the dead. And this is not something I heard. This is something I saw. Should have been dead. She called his name. He's alive to this day.
Wow.
She was used many, many times in that way. She became a nurse in the critical care unit just so that she could pray. That was what she wanted to do. So she went through school so she could be in a position where God could use her. And time again, he did. When she became sick, and the cancer for her started with breast cancer, but it metastasized through her bones to her brain. Before we found that out, she was acting strange, erratic. I mean, I could give you a testimony of just how all of this happened. But they say that brain cancer and bone cancer is the most painful. She didn't feel any pain. But sometimes she would get, pain in her body, and she would call me, and she was my intercessor. I became her intercessor. She would call me and say, Matisa, I need you to pray this scripture. I'm feeling this pain. She was basically teaching me to do what she had always done for us. So long story short, right before she was to be admitted into hospice, we're around her. She had been taken to the emergency room. She's in pain, and she says, Matisa, pray. And I knew what that meant, war. Just like you were saying, AD, war, war, war. So I'm warring as I'd always done. And God had always raised her up. God told me in that moment, he said, I'm not going to raise her this time. I need you to pray that she will release, that she will allow herself to let go and not fight anymore. Now, here I am, the daughter. I'm with my sister and my husband. Ooh, I feel that even now. And you're telling me I've got to have the strength to pray that my mom will allow you just to go ahead and take her home and not fight for her to stay? But I did. I did that as I was instructed, and a week later, she passed away peacefully. I said all of that to say there are so many facets, and Ray brought this out, and I think it's so important. All of our experiences are so unique. That's why the grief is going to be unique. But I do believe there is an intentionality that we should have. When I was choosing not to grieve, I fell deeper into depression. But I'll be honest, in terms of my experience, I looked to God. I said, God, I'm not going to live here. I got children to raise. I have a husband to care for. I've got a life to live. And when I made that conscious decision, it didn't change the pain, but it changed my trajectory. And I felt myself able to get up in a way that I hadn't been able to do before. So as Ray said, be gracious, know that your experience is unique, but want to heal, want to get up. And I think that can make the difference too.
Man, whew, you guys are literally laying it out. Like, and I think that that's a big statement to say, I want to be, you know, biblically we look at it, the man at the pool, do you want to be made whole? It's, I'm asking this because I can, but if I don't, it's not a matter of if I can, it's a matter of, do you want it? Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, understanding that, like, this is connected to my own desire to be bigger. I mean, not bigger, but better than what I have been before. That now I want to go on this journey. Like you said, Dr. Matisa, it is the idea of the intentionality of my healing. I want to put some intentionality behind my desire to want to be better and want to sit with this and want to walk out this journey and then look at grief through a different lens. We got a few questions that, and guys, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're on YouTube live, and then we're also on Zoom, and we have about 30 people in Zoom. And I think there was like 25 or something on YouTube Live. So if you guys have questions, please ask those. We had a question earlier, and so what I do, I take pictures of it, and then I come back and I ask them so I don't forget. The question was, is it a difference between grief and mourning? Is it a difference between grief and mourning? You guys want to chime in with that?
I'll let Ray, you want to chime in?
I feel like there are some similarities and differences with grief and mourning. Mourning is said to be kind of like that outward expression of it, of that grief. Also, with the fact that mourning can kind of last a little bit longer. It's kind of like more drawn out. Because I mean, excuse me, saying the word, right? Like just to say I'm mourning, it's a little bit more drawn out. A bit more expressive, if you will, dramatic, if you will, than grief itself is. And so that's what I would say to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. Grief is the condition or the state, and mourning is the outward expression.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. Thank you guys for sharing that. I had another question, and this question was, I think it was for me. Pastor Andy asked, "Ad, do you ever feel the pressure of carrying the legacy of your father?" To be honest, Pastor Andy, I've with my father's, like I feel the weight of my father's. Like I feel, my grandfather raised me from the ministry standpoint. My stepfather had probably the biggest hand of raising me that I now am identifying in his departure. I didn't identify with that when I was living in the moment. And because I was overlooking, and I'm just gonna be totally honest, I was overlooking my stepfather because I wanted the love of my father. My father was consistently present. My stepfather was consistently present. My stepfather was always there. When I got older, me and my stepfather would have conversations about money, budgets. I would help him. He would help me. I never forget, I was in a crazy transitional place, and I was in college, and that was just rough. I was broke. I was and I remember just crying to my stepfather, and I was like, man, I'm supposed to be a man. I'm supposed to have this figured out by now. And my stepfather would always, overemphasize the level of grace that I need to have becoming a man, and now I appreciate his voice and our relationship so much more now than I ever have. In him not being here, my father's concept was my father was very inconsistent, but I yearned for the relationship with my father. It is actually altered, if I'm all the way 100% honest, it is altered even how I receive love now. My mom is a diehard lover of Adriandavis. My mom loves me. Me and my mom have a great relationship. But it was, even in that, it was certain things that I needed from my father that my mom could not provide. And as amazing as my mom is, I still had a thing for my father that I needed him to feel. So it's not necessarily the legacy that I feel that I should live up to. For me, it's a level of now providing a voice for, I have a daughter, and providing that voice of direction and strategy to my daughter, that when my time comes, that she's not yearning for a ghost.
Mm.
Like, so for me, at times I still yearn for a ghost. Like, because I was doing a lot of things out of the acceptance with, hopefully, my father, and he loved me for sure. um but I was doing a lot of things and building a lot of things with the hope of his acceptance. And so now you no longer have that presence to where, you need him to accept you because he's not here. But just trying to make sure that not quote unquote live out his legacy, but live out mine, from the standpoint of letting the people that are in my life know how much I appreciate them, how much I love them, how much they mean to me. Where in my departure, that they don't have to be guessing for that presence. And I'm still working on that right now. Like, I'm still trying to strengthen my voice with my daughter. When I adopted my daughter was 17. And so now coming into her life where she's never had a father, and now being a father voice to her and giving her that fatherly counsel and that advice with her relationships and who she dates or direction for her life. I want to be that. So I don't think it's necessarily living out the legacy. I think it's creating my own, but then pulling from all the men that I've encountered from different aspects. My stepfather, my grandfather with ministry, my stepfather with just life and manhood. And then also my father, he taught me, but he taught me in reverse. So understanding that I don't want people to fish for that affirmation. I want to be able to give it. And so I'm still learning that. So, but now I don't feel the need to live out their legacy. I just want to live out mine. And so that's a big portion for me. Um, so we got another question. Do you all believe the reason we're taught to keep going is because life still is happening, work, raising kids, etc.? So is it almost a luxury per se to be able to actually have time to really heal?
Mm.
Is it a luxury per se to have time to really heal? Because and I think what T is saying too is that a lot of us, you know, Dr. Matisa, we may have a job where, they may give you 3 days for grief.
Right. Right.
give you a week. But you got to come on back to work. So
That's
how do we process that when we still got to get up and show up? Because if
right.
we don't, we're gonna lose this job, and if we don't, there's another layer of, man, I'm trying not to cry with this, because I understand that, like, feeling like you gotta consistently show up, but you need the time to take the break, but you don't have it to take. How can we deal with that without feeling like, well, we don't have the luxury for it? So, Dr. Matisse, could you chime in with that? Then Ray, you'll go after her.
Yeah, I think that's real. I mean, let's just acknowledge that that, like you said, life goes on. I think the difference though is we we stop the emotional work. I mean, healing is an emotional work. It doesn't mean that you're not physically going to work. It doesn't mean that you don't have children that you're raising, that you're not having to go ahead and continue with life. But when you start to do that work, it's really the emotional piece. Are you taking on additional things? Unfortunately, we can't take off a month, right? To just say, I'm going to sit in this grief and I'm going to deal with this and be intentional. That's not realistic. What is realistic, though, is being honest with yourself. What is being realistic is being able to have some support around you as much as possible to help you start doing some of that emotional work. What we tend to do in terms of just that busyness is we act like we're just not grieving. And we just act like, oh, everything is okay. So not only am I going to work, but I'm not thinking about, I'm not processing what I've lost. I'm not dealing
Mm-hmm.
with those emotions, even in my alone time. In fact, if we're honest, how many of us even have alone time? How many of us take time to reflect and to really process what we're dealing with? So again, the short answer is we have to keep on lifing. For most of us, we don't have time to just totally shut down, but that doesn't mean that we can't do the emotional work and the emotional healing. I'm not taking on anything extra. I'm going to find somebody if I can't afford therapy, because that's the other thing. There are grief groups that you can go to that's free, and we're thankful for that. But then a lot of other places cost. So if you don't have the money, do you have somebody that you can talk to? Right? How can, there are other strategies that are free that you can start, engaging in, even if you have to still do work and all of the other things that the person asked about.
And Ray, before you go with this, I'll say this: just because you have a life that you have to live and provide for, does not mean that you become numb to the feeling of grief. And
That's
it's
right.
like, you still have to, yeah, you still got to get out there and show up, but you also still have the responsibility to feel. And what I told myself as a man, now you women have different perspectives. Men, we have different perspectives because we're just different. But as a man, I felt the need to provide more than I prized or prioritized my own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So, because for me, I've always felt like I was only as good as what I was able to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that grief set in, it was like, oh no, like you got to shake it off, because you can't afford to take time. You can't afford to take a break. You can't afford to, to do that. But then now looking back at it, as I'm even through these sessions gaining some insight about my own journey, I can't afford not to.
Okay.
I can't afford not to, because if everything is reliant on me showing up, but if I can't show up for real, like in my authentic self and be healthy, I'm a fraction of who I am. So therefore, things are going to fall between the cracks. Things are going to go undone. Things are going to go without being handled, because I am not at a good space for that. Ray, what would you say about that?
Um, the first thing that I would say to that is we have to recognize that healing is our right. We have a right to heal, right?
Woo.
So if we
Yeah.
look at it in the fact that we have a right to heal versus the luxury, then it goes back to what you said, Dr. Matisa, about the intentionality to heal. So
Mm-hmm.
we know that most jobs are only going to give you those 3 days. They might give you 4 or 5, depending on the company. But even in that, you do still have to go to work. You still do have to show up. But if you have those moments where while you're at work, that grief hits, it's better for you to take that moment, excuse yourself, take your break early, whatever that looks like. So it goes back to what you said, AD, like if I'm only showing up as a fraction of myself, then I'm actually not showing up because all of me is not present. And so I think it's a matter of us, first of all, again, recognizing that healing is our right, right? Because the CEOs are going to take the time they need. You know what I mean? The
You
founders
feel
gonna
me?
take the time they need. And my mother used to say this to me, and it would irritate me. It would hurt my little feelings, but I understand it. She said, Ray, if you died today, they're gonna have that job posting up by tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's how they are going about it, we then have to be intentional about our healing. And I'm gonna add this, Dr. Matisa, you named about the intentionality of healing, and it leads me to amend my statement about prayer. When I say we shouldn't just have people praying about it, not to just pray about it only, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times that's what, oh, just pray about it. Just no, we have to pray and cry, right? Like we have to pray and navigate. We have to pray and feel. And so that's what I add to that as well.
Yeah.
Can I add something
Yeah. Go
else?
ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add, I love what Ray said about our right to be healed. And this is the other thing. Grief is so complex. It's not just about the emotions. It's connected to our physicality, our physiology, sickness, depression. Some people have migraines and you don't realize it's because you're grieving. or, there are lots of other things that's connected to it. So if you don't grieve now, find ways, not to say that it's easy, it's going to come up. It's going to show out. Anger. Some people are walking around angry all the time at everything. It's messing up relationships. It's messing up the way you see the world because you're not allowing yourself to grieve in a healthy, healing way. So if you don't do it, we can't look at it just as a luxury. It's a right. It's a necessity. If we don't do it, it could certainly impact everything else in our lives. So I'm add
Man.
that.
And you
So,
are,
AD,
huh? Go ahead.
let me add to what she just said, the ping
Uh-huh.
pong, right? So, Dr. Matisa, what you said about the physical aspect is so true. One of the number one causes for chronic illness is unresolved emotion, right? So then when you have those stress pockets in your shoulder and your back, or you're having some pain that you're not able to identify, the cause of it, the doctor can't diagnosis or what have you, 9 times out of 10 you need a good cry or however else you express that grief. So that is very true. It's not just emotional, it's physical. It can show up in your finances, like you said. It can show up in your relationships. It can show up in so many other areas. And so we have to be intentional about our right to heal.
Amen.
We do, and I love that. And you guys, these like people are in this chat, especially on Zoom, going crazy right now. Because they were, especially when you were talking about how it shows up in your body and it shows up in other areas. And some of them saying, because like like you said, Katina Jones says that she said your body keeps the score. And Nakina said, like she says slash have panic attacks. Me personally, I've experienced that. I deal still to this day. I deal with a strong level of insomnia, where I will go days. I think last week I was up for 3 days straight.
Wow.
I go days without sleep. I will lay there, cut the TV off, I'll toss and turn. A portion of that is you start to relive moments, and then and then it's important to also go back and identify with if you're being attacked at a certain specific time at night or during the day, or certain areas or certain aspects bring you anxiety or whatever the case is. I tend to try to go back to areas and ask myself, why at this time does this happen? One of the things that I tend to, well, that I realize I have a hard time sleeping at night, but I was woken up out of my sleep to the call about my father.
Mm, mm,
So so I sleep very light. I'm afraid that I'm going to miss something, or afraid that, somebody's going to call with some bad news, or like when my phone vibrates, like literally, like and this is a part of coping, or comfort, that I started like trying to take sleeping medication
Mm-hmm.
to help me sleep. But then you almost kind of become reliant on
mhm,
it, and it goes back to the question, Dr. Matisa, is the fact of, do you want to be whole, or do you want to be healed? And that's a process that you have to be committed to, like,
Yeah.
because it's not going to happen overnight. And I had to decide that I'm committed to the process. And I still have my moments, like there are times where I sleep amazingly, but then I still have my moments like last week, where I'm up, or whatever the case is, but I'm committed to the process to walk it out,
Yeah.
and to see myself on the other side of it. And I think that where we give up, or where we stop, is that we find something that comforts us, and then we say, okay, this is it. And then we lean into that comfort, or we lean into that coping, and then we don't thrive to be all the way healed from whatever, because we've just become so accustomed to that.
That's right. That's good.
So I'm finding that with myself. Someone asked a question. Raven asked a question, and hold on, let me get to this. Uh, Amanda, that was a good point. Amanda said, "Trust me when I say the devil hates when we pray for a reason. Prayer is so important and it's so powerful. We couple those things together, and I think Ray, you were talking about that. Just yeah, we want to pray and do some action, right?
Yeah.
We want to pray and be committed to that process. We want to pray
Mm-hmm.
and seek that thing out. Like that's what we want to do. But Raven asked a question. She says, "Do any of y'all feel like grief ever actually leaves, or does it just become diluted as you heal?"
I think for me, and I love what the term commitment to the process of grief. We talked about the fact that, perhaps for the rest of our lives, we're going to feel that absence. There's not a Christmas or a birthday or, a sunset. My mom loves sunsets. There's no time that I don't look at that and see my mom. I think for me, the difference is the weight of it, how
Yes.
long it lasts, and my response to it, right? So initially, it felt like I could not breathe. I don't know if anybody has ever experienced that, but literally, maybe that was a panic attack that I just didn't recognize. But I just thought, I'm not going to be able to live. I'm not going to be able to breathe without my mom. But as I became committed to the process and God really has taken me on this healing journey, I don't have as many of those moments, right? I do have the waves, I do have the triggers. They don't last as long. And my ability to respond to them is different. Before, I
Mm.
didn't know how to respond, and it just weighed me down. Now, as I can become more aware of it more readily, I can do something. I can either do something to help it, or I can just say, you know what, I'm going to give into this feeling. Sometimes I give into it and say, I'm just going to cry my eyes out because my mom is not here.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But that's a release because, again, I'm not trying to be here forever. Another thing that I tell people is my mantra is today is not forever. So if I cry today, eat my ice cream today, do whatever I'm going to do today,
Woo-wee.
not going to be forever.
Yeah.
So if I give into it in this moment, tomorrow is going to bring something different. So I guess my short answer is, again, it just gets different, and you can learn to respond to it in a healthier way.
Ray, what do you say about that?
I would I agree with what Dr. Matisa said and add to that, I think that as we heal, the intensity changes. That the intensity decreases. That we are not only able to feel what we feel, but we allow ourselves a quicker permission, if you will, to release those feelings. Because sometimes people feel like, well, if I grieve, then I won't remember my loved one anymore, right? And that's actually the complete opposite. Like we will never forget those people. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a matter of us recognizing that intensity changes. It's not as intense, right? The feelings may not be as strong. Again, like Dr. Matisa said, it doesn't take away from the fact that those waves will come. And sometimes they are strong waves that will knock you right off your feet. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that when the next wave comes, that it will be as intense.
So, and I wholeheartedly agree with the both of you. I think that it's like the new norm, but then it's like you start to just adjust to it. And I don't think it ever just goes away. I just think it's like you just deal with it differently. I remember I remember my when my grandfather passed away. My grandfather and my grandmother, I watched my mom really be strong during those times, and those are both of her parents. And a lot of times, like, we get so caught up in the person and how that person impacted us that we don't think about that somebody else may be, what I'm saying, like, dealing with it a little bit worse than what we dealing with it. And not to say like we're measuring grief, right? Like, Ray, you were talking about that earlier, like we don't know the dynamics of the relationships and so forth and so on. And I think that we can start to compare almost grief, and say, oh, this person, blah, blah, blah. But I watched my mom just deal with it in such a graceful way, and I'm like, those are her parents. Like, like, And I'm like, man, like mom and dad now gone, and I spent so much time like my granddad and my grandmama, but I think also too, it's you like even in dealing with them or feeling the grief that I felt with them, it's not that that grief has left me. That grief is still there. I now, like Dr. Matisa was talking about, that I now have a healthier way to tackle that grief and those feelings, because I more so grieve them from a place of healthy remembrance of my relationship with them and how much fun I had with them. And I have euphoric opportunities. Like when I say euphoric opportunity, I create euphoric opportunities. At night, one of the things that I do, and I learned this from I learned why I do this from counseling. For those that don't know, yeah, I'm a preacher. I love therapy. I love God. I
Me too.
love therapy. I love, uh,
Amen.
as challenging as it is emotionally, it's a space. But I asked my counselor one time. I was like, man, like, and my mom just she just put in the Zoom. She says, we honor their life now. That's what we do. We honor their life now, and I think that that's a great way to put that, Mama. Thank you for that. Um,
Mhm.
but I asked my counselor. I was like, why do I watch? Because at nighttime, I watch stuff that I've always watched, like stuff that I know. Like so, Martin. I'm a Martin fanatic. If people don't know that, I'm a Martin fanatic. I have the Martin trivia cards. Nobody beats me in Martin trivia. Nobody. I'm a Martin fanatic. So I'm gonna either watch Martin, Cosby Show, A Different World,
Mhm.
um, and one of my favorites is Family Matters. And mainly Family Matters is because my grandmother, when my mother and my father went through their divorce, my grandmother would give my mom Fridays off. So she would pick up me and my sister from school on Friday, and my grandmother would just be so excited to go get some KFC and get us some Taco Bell or get us some McDonald's, and we'll go to the house, and she would be so excited that TGI Friday would come on, and we would watch TGI Friday, and Family Matters was our show. It's what we
Mhm.
watched together, and so
Mhm.
at night. When I'm winding down, I ask my counselor, like, why do I watch stuff that I know the ending? And she says it eases your anxiety,
Mhm.
because you know the outcome. So in a day that you feel like it's up and down and you have really no, especially when you're pastoring, you don't know how your day's going to go. You don't know what emergencies you're going to be hit with. You don't know if somebody is going to pass or somebody, and you live in a high anxiety moments or you've had a lot of trauma. What you tend to do is that you want to control some aspect of your day, and it gives you a feeling of almost control because you know the outcome of this. I don't have
Mhm.
to guess what's going to happen. I know the outcome of this. And so a lot of us, if you find yourself doing that, it could just be a trauma response of a level of comfort. Like I want to have some comfort before I go to sleep. And that's something that I have found myself doing. Um, we have a few questions, guys. I want to tap into them before we let you guys go. Um, because we're coming to the end of this, but this conversation is so good. Uh, I'm just locked into it. But we have a few questions that have come through. One of the questions were, guys, that let me see. Hold on one second. All right, it says, can you give a tip on how to deal with grief when forgiveness for those who have passed has not taken place?
Mm. 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 Well, I'll give a strategy, a tool that I teach people, and I'm sure Ray's got quite a few as well. One of the parts of sessions that I teach is called grieving with no regrets. And the
Mm,
reality is that sometimes we do have those regrets because you didn't get a chance to make up or bring forgiveness or restoration, reconciliation, or whatever. And one of the practices that I use is writing a letter. Um, and I'm sure people have heard of this exercise, but I can't articulate how powerful it is. The reality is that that person is not going to be able to come back. You're not going to be able to have a face to face. But being able to write a letter as if you're going to be able to send it and get everything out, whether it's your perspective, everything that you would want to say to that person, And then I usually take people through the exercise of once you're finished with it, process it, and then burn it. Again, some of this, and I don't want to sound callous when I say it, but we do have to choose to let go. We do have to choose to grieve. And this is one exercise that where we can get all of those things out. And you might have to write several letters, you might have to do it several times, but the whole point is to be able to bring at least a little bit of closure. And that again won't change everything, it won't make everything better, but it will start the process of coming to that closure. So that's an exercise that I take people through, and it's powerful.
That's awesome. Awesome. Ray, what would you say about that?
I do the exact same thing. I
That's
do the
awesome.
exact same thing. I let people know, like, write the letter, that it's not something that have to do today and then it's done by the next time we meet next week, right?
Yeah.
I encourage them, like Dr. Matisa said, it's a continuous thing. And I encourage them to read it, to write it as if they are going to talk to that person. I encourage them to read it and either burn it or tear it up and put it in the trash. The other thing about that is that they have to grieve that that forgiveness did not take place while that person was alive. Because the one of the things about grief, and you named this in the beginning, AD, that we don't just grieve death, right? One of the other things that we don't recognize when we grieve is possibilities. The
Hmm.
possibility of what did not happen, the possibility of what we thought was going to happen. Somebody had a possibility or the expectation that they were going to be able to reach out to their loved one and seek that forgiveness, or that their loved one was going to reach out to them, and sometimes people don't want to, and then there are times where they want to and they don't have that opportunity. So but I am of the opinion that before you can grieve the death, you first have to grieve the fact that that possibility never became realized.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I wholeheartedly agree with what you guys have said. I chime in with this last part about forgiveness. One of the things that we did, or I would do every year when I was pastoring, and usually in February, or sometimes we would do it in the summer, but I would teach a series called I Forgive, and we would do proxies where somebody would stand in the gap for someone and become that person, for the conversation that you did not have. And we literally would see people literally have full fledged breakdown, cry, roll around on the floor, because they now are experiencing or getting a level of closure that they felt that they've always needed, but they were robbed of. And so with proxies, they just stand in the gap. So and there may be times where you probably need a proxy, where somebody is saying, hey, can you just stand in the gap as this person for me for a moment? Let me get this out. And then, to couple what Dr. Matisa and what Dr. Ray, I'm gonna speak that into this, what Dr. Ray is saying is literally that, like, if you wrote out the letter, and sometimes writing a letter can be so freeing to your heart, to your mind, to your emotions, but then also you could take that letter and ask someone to stand in the gap and, hey, can you operate as my father right now? And then read that letter to them, so it gives you another layer of, I have communicated this. And so it may not, because I don't think that it's anything that's magic about anything. I think it's a process that we, although you may do that, you may feel lighter after it, you still have to walk through and be committed to the process that you're committed to see it, to see it all the way through. So there's two more things there's a question. There's a question, and it's a last point that I want to ask or bring up, and then we'll be done. So we got one more question, and this question, she gives us some information, and then she gives us a question. She says, "Grief hits different for me. I think." She says, "Grief hits different for me, I think, because I saw it and I felt it before it happened." And
Mm.
And that's the feeling I can't shake. So I try to block certain moments and certain things. I say all that to say, is that what is keeping me from healing properly? Is that maybe I'm blocking it?
Yes. The yes. It's interesting that you named that. I can remember in my own way grieving my mother, grieving the diagnosis, right? Grieving the quote unquote prognosis, and grieving the fact that I knew my mother wasn't going to make it through this on this side, right? And so I had my moment of grief. But to the person who asked that question, you have to allow yourself permission to realize that there's a difference when you're grieving them in life than when you're grieving them in death,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a difference in grieving them in life and grieving them in death. And what we said, I don't know, about 15, 20 minutes ago, right? Like if you don't allow yourself to grieve, it's going to show up in other areas if it has not already shown up. And so give yourself that permission. There's an exercise that I do with some of my clients around the permission to grieve. And I have them to put their phone on selfie mode, look themselves in the eye on selfie mode, call their name. I, Ray Karim, give myself permission to grieve. And so if that's something that you literally have to do so that you can destroy that block, so that you can move and navigate through this journey, so that you can heal, because again, healing is your right, right? You have a right to heal. You have a right to be whole. But in order for you to do that, you have to be willing to unlearn some of those things and literally destroy some of those thoughts and expectations that you have.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Ray said. I remember when my mom was getting sick and I knew I was still believing, like you were. I was believing that God was going to heal her and she was going to be a 21st century miracle. Um, I would almost try because I so want to control the situation. I almost wanted to start grieving even before she passed. I can remember thinking, what's it going to be like when she's no longer here? I'm thinking all of these things because I think if I start it now, perhaps I'll get through it more quickly. And then God had to really correct me. And he's like, she's not gone. Love her and live every single day while she's on this earth so that you have the benefit of her presence because there's going to be a time when she's no longer here. And so we try to control situations. And what I would just say, and what I hope people hear me say with this grieving is so hard but I hope that we, like Ray said, we give ourselves permission and we realize there is good in the pain. That's the thing that we try to block. We don't want to feel the sadness. We don't want to feel the hurt. We don't
Yep.
want to feel the things that come with that hard part. And I get it. That's our humanity. But if we can shift our paradigm, and I would say to the person who asked the question, there it is better on the other side. Please hear that. Grief comes, waves come. It's hard, but it's better when you're committed to that process. You're going to cry anyway. Why not cry with the release of having been committed to the grieving process? You're going to feel bad that your loved one is gone anyway. Why not get to the other side of that where you can honor the life? So that exercise that Ray talked about is beautiful. I think it is so good. But again, I just want to say there is good in that pain. And when you can give yourself up to that idea and you start going through it, you're going to find yourself. As I said, it's supernatural. It is true that I woke up one day, having gone through the process, and said, I can breathe.
Yeah.
I can breathe today.
Yeah.
That's when God showed me he was doing it, that I
Yeah.
was allowing him to heal me.
Man, that is so good. I wanted to I want to touch on this before we close this out, and we actually got a question that's in align with what I wanted to end this with, because I wanted to end it with, because I think it's important to talk about um when there is anger.
Mm.
right? Like when there's anger. I have a video on my YouTube where I talk about I'm angry. I was angry with God. You know, I just got to a point where I was just extremely angry with God, and um, trying to trying to understand, like, God, why? You know, why would you allow, or why did this happen, or whatever the case is? And there's a level of anger that you have to learn how to accept that you have, because a lot of times we feel bad for having a level of anger. Like, and I think it's like a natural emotion. Like, the Bible talks about be angry, but don't allow the sun to go, be angry, but sin not, don't allow the sun to go down on your wrath. And literally, it tells us that anger is an emotion that God gave. The problem is that when we allow anger to, not us to have that emotion, but now anger has us, and we operate out of a place of anger. We make decisions out of a place of anger. We treat people from a place of anger, and everything about us is angry. And so someone asked this question, so I wanted us to touch on this, and then this is going to be it, guys. Man, this conversation has been amazing, and I would love to keep it going, but for one, Dr. Matisa got to get back to her husband, and we're not trying to keep her away from her husband too much longer. And Dr. Ray, we speaking your husband in existence right now.
Yes, Lord.
So, I want to ask this question. This question came on Zoom, and this was great. This question says, I'm grieving the fact that I lied to my mom on her deathbed when she asked me if I forgave her for everything she took me through. I could not let her die knowing I didn't. Now I am grieving my lie. Whew.
And this is how you want us to end this, AD? That's not right. That's not right. It ain't right.
Yes. I mean, but I feel like that's such a great, because it deals with these anger and these emotions, and a lot of times and so I start off with the answer to this, and then we can just chime in. But a lot of us, through that anger and through that regret, where maybe we prize someone else's emotion in that moment over even the truthfulness of what we may feel. And so I'll start off by saying, I don't think that you lied. I think it's a matter of you deciding in that moment you were going to go on the process of forgiveness. And I think that you're in the journey of forgiveness. And the misconception is that when we say that we forgive someone, that forgiveness is instant.
Yes.
It is not. It is not instant. It is not instant. Forgiveness is a process, the same way grief is a process. We forgive people as we go. We forgive people as time moves forward. And we have to be okay. We have to be okay with understanding that maybe in that moment I initiated the thought of forgiveness, because maybe before she was on that deathbed, you didn't even think about forgiving her. You was like, yo, like, this, I'm a die with this emotion. But in that moment, you initiated the thought and said, you know what? I can start the process of forgiveness concerning her. And so I don't think it's a matter of the lie. I think that maybe you had, and I'm saying this with the most sensitive way that I can say it, maybe you had unrealistic expectations as it pertains to your forgiveness. And so maybe you thought that as soon as you said it, you weren't going to feel it anymore. As soon as you said it, it wasn't going to be there. But now you have the process of forgiveness that you've started, that you haven't all the way came to the completeness of. Now you have another layer of grief that you're facing, and all of these emotions are tackling at the same time. You got to deal with the fact that she's no longer here. We can't have this conversation. We can't walk through forgiveness together about what you did, how it made me feel, so forth and so on. but understanding that you have to come to your own recollection of closure. People tell me all the time, well, I need to have a conversation with this person to have closure. But that concept of having a conversation for the sake of closure is not a realistic expectation, because if I have to have a conversation with you and you agree with everything that I say, or you say the right thing, in order for me to get closure, I didn't have closure. I have closure coming into the conversation that no matter what you say, I'm going to leave this conversation feeling better and feeling healthier than when I came in. It's not a matter of you agreeing with everything. I gained closure before I went. And so I think that you started the process, you starting the process of healing, started the process of forgiveness. But I think that, as Ray said earlier, we have to give ourselves grace and we have to be patient with ourselves, and understanding that forgiveness also is a journey the same way grief is. Dr. Matisa, would you chime in with that?
Yeah, I would say this. What kept coming up for me is, I think you should, the person who asked the question should really sit with what the real issue is.
Mm-hmm.
So the real issue, is the grief at the heart of it. Is it that you told somebody on their deathbed something that would give them ease in transition? Is that what you're really grieving? Or are you grieving that you couldn't reconcile? Are you grieving the fact that you didn't tell the truth? Right? Is it that you told the lie so that they could or is it that you did not tell the truth in time so that you can start working on and dealing with the relationship? And regardless of what the answer is, I would go back to what I started with. That day, when we grieve to the point where we're stagnant, it's almost like Groundhog's Day, where we're reliving that day over and over and over. And the question becomes, do you want to move on? And if you do, even if you didn't forgive, like that was a bold-faced lie, you wasn't going to try to forgive, you just said it. Regardless of what the reality is, you still have to move on. And so I would just suggest that you sit down, that you really think about, meditate on, what am I really grieving here? And then start the process. We didn't talk about this, but we could talk about compound grief. We can be grieving multiple things all at the same time. And that's weighty. So it sounds like just asking the question means you're on the journey, which is wonderful. And as you parcel it out and work through it, you're going to get more answers for yourself than perhaps you have right now.
That's so good. That's so good, Ray.
I am adding to what both AD and Dr. Matisa have already said, and I add to that the same selfie exercise that I give clients about the permission to grieve. I am assigning that to you, to look yourself in the face, call yourself by your name, and forgive yourself. Yeah. Because along with sitting with that, forgive yourself, because you did the best you could in that moment, right? Dr. Matisa, I completely agree with what you said about wanting to make that transition easier, right? And so you did the best that you could in that moment with the tools that you had, with the feelings that you had. And so it's a matter of you forgiving yourself, knowing that Dr. Matisa said, even if it was a bold-faced lie, it wasn't, I don't believe that it was malicious, right?
Yeah.
Like if it was malicious, then you wouldn't care. You'd be like, yep, I said what I said. It is what it is, and that's it. But because you asked the question is a sign that there's some care in that for you. So you have to forgive yourself, and then you can move forward with that process. One honest, gentle step at a time. One honest, gentle step at a time. One honest, gentle step at a time.
I love that. Man, I hate to wrap this up, but we got to let you guys go.
We going part two, AD?
Yeah, we're gonna have to, like, I've now like created a pattern, like people like, okay, so who you gonna have on Good Grief in the next 2 weeks, like, and I'm just like, all right, so we got to keep this thing going. Lamar is Lamar still on here? Let me see if I can see him over on, because he's on the, yes, he is. Okay, he's still in the room. Lamar Weaver asked this, and I got to, we'll end it right here because it's in conjunction with what we, but for one, I'm biased because I love when men ask questions. I love it. I I love when men ask questions, because I feel like, especially when we lean into topics that we really, really need. And when we hear people talking about it and we shy away from it, and then we don't get the things that we need, or we don't ask the questions that we need to ask. And because we tend to self-medicate. Yeah. And it leaves us in habitual acts and things of that nature. But this is along the lines of what we were just talking about. Lamar said, I had to personally get past anger with God and my mom, feeling like I was abandoned and left. She chose to just stop dialysis. It was like, God, why didn't you heal her? To her, it was like, why did you leave me? I'm healed now, but woo, that process. Can, in light, and Lamar, thank you. Let me say this. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for your comment, and just thank you for your level of honesty in that moment. But as we leave, what can we say to people that do still have that anger, or walking through that process as it pertains to God? Why did you do it this way? We talked about a little bit when I was talking about with my brother. God, why did you do it this way? How come you didn't do it the way I thought that you would? And then if someone, says, hey, I don't want to do dialysis anymore. I don't want to take that medication anymore. I don't want to do that. And so, Lamar, I say this to that statement. I remember when my grandfather, okay. Okay. I remember my grandfather, when he was coming to the end of his life, he was dealing with dementia very, very badly. I didn't want to see my grandfather like that. I did not want that to be the last impressed upon image of my grandfather. I didn't want to see him like that. And then I remember I was asking God to heal my grandfather, to restore him. I was asking God to heal my grandmother and restore her. And even my stepfather got very sick. And I remember when my grandfather transitioned, I was praying and I was mad with God. And I told God, I was like, God, can you just work a miracle the same way Dr. Matisa said her mom prayed and a man came back to life? I was like asking God, like, bring him back. And God told me, he says, you want me to bring him back to suffering for the sake of you. But what about the quality of his life? Mm. And he says at that point, he says, your grandfather's healed, he's whole. Even if and this is how I believe God talks to me. Like, God literally had to like position it this way. Even if I gave him the opportunity to leave heaven right now, he would choose to stay. He loves you. He loves you. Doesn't negate the fact that he loves you. But what he's experiencing here is totally different than what he was experiencing there. And at some point, we got to take into consideration our loved ones, the quality of life that they were having. And are they just here for our own emotional okayness versus them living a quality life? So what can we say to those that may, as we leave this platform, what can we say to those that are still battling a level of anger as it pertains to grief, and God choosing to do what God sovereignly chooses to do? Like, how do we wrap our mind around that? And what can we say to people like that?
I would just say simply, and there's no easy answer, trust the process, right? Understand anger is a part of it. And God is big enough to handle it. God is big enough to handle the anger. Big enough to handle it. Right? the questions. He's big enough when we go to him in honesty. And we've talked about that a lot, to say, God, I am mad. My brother passed away unexpectedly last year. Got a call in January, went to see about him, was there a month, and by the end of that month, he was gone. I I mean, what do you do with that as a human? Um, it's hard. So I'm still going through stages again of grief, but I have resigned within myself again that I'm going to get to the point where I can honor his life more than I mourn his death. And I'm not 100% there, but I'm on that pathway. And if anger is part of it, I'm going to trust the process. And I'll say this very last thing. The reason I believe that it's important for us to learn healthy ways of grieving is because grief is a part of life,
Yeah.
period. Somebody else is going to die. You're going to lose a job. There's going to be a loss of a relationship. And it doesn't mean that every experience is the same, but if I've got tools and I've got hope, I know there's another side. And that helps. So anger is part of it. Trust the process and know he's a big God.
Awesome. Awesome. Ray, how would you say that to someone?
Um, I echo what you said, Dr. Matisa, and I would add what I said at the end of the last question, answer to the last question. Be honest and be gentle with yourself, right? I tell people that as long as we breathe, we grieve. It doesn't mean that we will be grieving as intensely or that we'll always be grieving per se the same thing. But like she said, it's a part of life. As long as we breathe, we grieve. And so God is big enough to handle it, right? And the Bible tells us to come boldly to the throne of grace to obtain mercy. It doesn't mean that we come boldly to the throne in perfection. We come with our anger. We come with our questions. We come with all of that, right? And so it's a matter of being honest and being gentle. And like you said, Dr. Matisa, trusting the process.
Guys, this was so amazing. I definitely be reaching out to get on your schedule for part two of this. I think I think I may be having a conversation with Prophet Joshua Smith about grief. That's who's been, he's working with, he counsels my mom through her grief process. And so I think our next session in 2 weeks will be with him. And then maybe, if you guys are free, then the next session, we'll try to get you guys back on. I would love, someone on Zoom just said part two, transitional grief.
Woo!
And so, talking about that for a session. Marcus Wynn literally just said this was very much therapy session. And guys, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the both of you for taking time out to share your experiences, your heart, your love for this topic. I'm just diving into this, and Dr. Matisa, I didn't even get a chance to talk about PGD, the prolonged grief disorder, where you talked about on the TED Talk. I thought that was because so many of us are there. Like, it's the prolonged grief, and like it's I was joking because like y'all remember the lean with it, rock with it dance. You'd be like, hey, and then it's like you throw it up, and then some people just do the absolute most. They throw it up there, run around there, then they'll come to the point, then they'll catch it, and it's like sometimes that's how grief shows up. It goes up, you start going through life, you thinking that everything's all good, you moving around, and all of a sudden,
There it is.
there it is. It shows up, and you like, wait a minute, and you got no choice but to dance with it. You got no choice but to engage and interact with it. So it's a few things that we didn't get a chance to cover, but yes, we definitely do. We definitely try to get on you guys' schedule to do it again. For everybody that was on, if you're on the YouTube. Let's see. Yes, my sibling. Okay. Yeah. If you're on the YouTube platform, make sure you thumbs up it. Make sure you like this. I'm going to make it public, so it's already recorded, it's already live, so it'll just be here on the platform. You can copy the link, share it with people, say, hey man, you want to tap into this conversation. I'm trying to continue to keep these things going every other week, and this has been a great session. Again, Dr. Matisa, thank you so very much. And I mispronounced your last name just naturally. When I see Will, I say Wilborn with the R, and it's Wilbon. Is it Wilbon?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I want to make sure I say it the right way, but thank you so very much. And Ray, thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I met Ray it's been years ago now at this point. She's been a part of our mentorship program. She's traveled with us. She's just done amazing. And so thank you so much for being on tonight. Thank you guys for engaging. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your inquisitiveness. Thank you for not just having us talk, but you guys engage with this talk. And for all of those that watched on Zoom, I think we had like 40 people in Zoom. Thank you for all the comments and the questions and whatever. Just thank you so very much. And we look forward to doing it again. As we leave from this, I just want to, we'll leave in prayer. But I want to leave with this thought before we pray, that the word tells us that we have not a high priest that cannot be touched. And I think that he's so in tune with even our emotions that that a lot of times we feel like nobody else understands us, but he definitely does. And we serve a God that feels us, and he's not a robot. And I think that to the level of his love for us is also the level of compassion that we should have with other people, especially with people that have experienced such things as traumatic grief and just grief in general. So let us pray. God, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this opportunity to have this dialogue and have this conversation. Father, we thank you for what you're doing in the lives of those that were watching and that will watch this. But also, God, thank you for those. Thank you for our two guests, God. Thank you for Dr. Matisa. Thank you for Ray. And we thank you for what you are doing in their lives collectively as well as individually. God, we just pray that that you continue to speak to them, give them more insight for this particular topic and other topics, God, that they will continue to add value to everyone that they encounter, Father. For we know that as long as we live, we will encounter a level of grief and we will encounter some pain. But God, help us to consistently remember that you are a God that is bigger than even the grief and the pain in which that we feel. God, thank you for allowing us to feel that if there are feelings, it's because we are alive. And if it's feelings, it's because we're here. And so thank you for the ability to feel. So God, we thank you for you being the God that you are. And we thank you for allowing us this opportunity. And we thank you for technology, that no matter where we are in the world, that your word and that your message and that your healing messages can get out to the world. So thank you that we lean into technology so that we can help people all across the world for this particular topic and different subjects. God, we just honor you for that now. Now, God, help us to remember that you're doing more than what we think you are, and we're doing better than what we think that we are. So, Father, again, you're doing more than what we think that you are, and we're doing better than what we think that we are. And so, Father, we just lean into that and we give ourselves more grace and more patience in this season of our lives. And we honor you for it. We thank you for this in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. You guys have a great night.
You too.
All right.
You too. Bye.